Right. Easy part first,
Yeah.
Name and title.
Well, my name is Veronica D'Souza. I'm the CEO and founder of Carcel.
Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you here to talk a bit about Carcel and also talk about Copenhagen Fashion Summit.
Right.
This is your first time here.
It is.
What brought you here?
I think the shame of not having been here the last 2 years. No,
Nice,
but
nice.
I was traveling actually in prisons, both last year and the year before when the summit was there. And obviously this is like, the center of the world for where, what is going on in sustainable fashion. So it's about time that I show up.
Definitely. Tell us a little bit about Carcel, and you mentioned prisons, but tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Right. So Carcel is a fashion label that employs women in prison in some of the poorer countries through a sustainable business model. It's a brand. So we've started in Peru, where we use 100% natural materials, alpaca wool. And then we employ women in a prison in Cusco, high up in the Andes Mountains, who are there because of poverty-related crime. And we take those years, many years, between 5 and 17 years that they spend inside of the prison. Most of them are providers. They come from low-income communities, and we transform those into good jobs with fair wages so that they can basically support their children and save up for a crime-free beginning when they get out, learn a new skill, and have something to get up to in the morning that motivates them so that when they get out, it's easier for them to reintegrate into society. So that's part of what we do.
Yes, but I think it's a good part to start with,
Yeah.
because it obviously has to deal with empowerment, and one thing that I hope we will begin to discuss even more at Copenhagen Fashion Summit, which is modes of production. How are clothing items actually produced?
Right.
So what brought you to look into prisons and look into the modes of production for your label Carcel?
I really believe that business can be a driver for solutions, right? So if you are to make capitalism work for good and solve problems instead of creating them, I think we might actually have a chance. And I was living in Kenya, and I was working with women and girls in slum areas from low-income communities, and I just started wondering about, women living in poverty. Why do they end up in prison? What's going on in these prisons? What do they look like? How is it to live there? And I was super curious. So I called up a prison and I went to visit one. And I think experiencing the fact that it was definitely poverty-related crime, drug trafficking, theft, prostitution, or just being at the wrong time,
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, exactly. And most of them providers. Combined with the fact that it was basically like a factory with full input. You had labor, lights, buildings, tables, and they were ready to do something. But there wasn't really anything for them to do. So I thought, looking at it from a resource perspective, and then I mapped the world into countries that have the most exclusive materials in the world, natural materials, like alpaca wool in Peru and silk in Thailand, where we're starting now, combined with the highest rates of poverty-related crime for women. So quite a dogmatic map, but
Nice.
There's actually a lot of countries that fit that intersect, because that's where I believe we can make an impact. And then I traveled to Peru and visited prisons, and we set up a production in Cusco, and now we just started in Chiang Mai in a maximum security prison in Thailand a week ago. So we're expanding a little bit, but really trying to eradicate poverty through a resource perspective where we make extremely beautiful products that are handmade and use the human power. We put the name of the woman who makes each item in the clothes.
Love it.
So who made your clothes, we know, and
Love
we tell
it.
you. But also
is
build on a
something we need now.
craft tradition. It's also something that's exclusive, going back to women for decades or generations have been working with alpaca wool and silk in Thailand and just know. So yeah.
So how does it work kind of on a lower, more basic level? Does the money actually go to the individual prisoners? Is it a microloan system? How do they actually get these funds? Obviously they're incarcerated.
Right.
Where do the funds go?
Right. So we've set up our own production in the women's prison in Cusco, because I think there's nothing new to having production in prisons. It's just pretty new that it's not exploitative.
Yeah, there you go. It's the slavery part.
Yeah. So actually making sure that they get a fair wage and that there are good working conditions and there's no overtime and so on. So first of all, the most important thing is that we've secured a partnership with the prison system. So we work with the government, work with the system. That's important. If not, you can't get access.
Absolutely.
And they've been extremely open towards this because they want to see a change as well. Then we've built up our production site inside of the prison, where we have a production manager from Germany who goes into the prison every day, because it's super offline. I think, we're a super online company with a completely offline production.
Love it.
No mobile phones, no computers, no internet, no nothing. It's all human based. So we speak to Maike, she goes into the prison, she works with the women, and when she gets out, we can either communicate again. So she brings in yarn and, drawings and so on, and brings out products and exports them. And then we pay the women every month in cash right now. And right now she goes and basically sends the money home to their families that they need. But that's because they don't have any bank accounts in the prison. So there's like a lack of infrastructure. That's something we're working to set up this year. Because in order to scale the production, we want to allow them to basically manage their own money and save up by themselves. But that's yet to come. It's a lack in infrastructure.
Now, I'm very, very fascinated with what you do. I think it's extremely clever and also extremely important when we discuss sustainability to talk about how we are ethically sustainable and who's actually making what we're wearing. One thing that we chatted about a little bit before was this immense focus on what is the material made of, which is obviously also a huge part of it when you look at waste, when you look at consumption. But one thing that we discussed is there's also a need to start talking about modes of production. Now you just made a new collection which really taps into this, waste not, want not, but tell us a little bit more about that and what it actually is doing.
Right, so we're quite ambitious in the sense that, I think when you have the luxury to design a new company from scratch, you also have the responsibility of the knowledge of the status quo of the world. So the way the industry works right now does not work for the future. So we've looked at every piece of the supply chain actually and tried to look at what do we believe is fashion of the 21st century. So you're right, one thing is you start with the material. We only use natural materials, we only use sustainable natural materials. And then in our production technique, this becomes very nerdy.
Yeah, no, but that's why we're here, girl.
It's all made on domestic and in semi-industrial hand knitting machines, so that means it's fully fashioned. So there's no waste. You use every piece of thread, and that's another very important place in the supply chain. Then we don't have any seasons at all. We sell predominantly online and through selected retail partnerships who basically believe in what we do. That means that something goes out of season when we or you say it goes out of season, not because there's a certain date in the calendar. And because we have our own production, we can make smaller batches that are limited, and when we sell out, we make something new. So that means we don't have any waste. And right now we're moving that over to pre-orders because it just makes sense. So we just launched a pre-order campaign, like opening our first window for 30 days, where we take in all the pre-orders for the fall. It's a wool outfit, so it's fine. I mean, I don't think anybody's dying to get one in June anyways. And that makes us able to have a really stable production. We can secure the women, and we can basically scale our production in a more responsible way. So yeah, I think rethinking, just trying to eliminate waste completely in the way we do business. And that's something we don't talk a lot about.
No. Obviously, my leading question is, do you think it's possible for a big fashion brand, we can go with a big fashion brand that is already established, do you think it's possible for them to even consider, based on the model of their business, do you think it's even possible for them to consider doing some of the things you're doing with pre-orders? Obviously, there's the idea of scale. Right. When you're looking at a company that has thousands of stores, right, do you think it's even possible?
I think, first of all, that it's necessary. And I think from the opening remarks this morning from Margrethe Vesta, I also loved how she basically tied this, it's not that the fashion industry has ever been scared or, in lack of imagination or unambitious. So I think, the qualities and competencies are there. But you need to completely change the business model. Do I think it's possible? Yes, I do. I actually think that it's a better business model to not have waste. Because if you have a lot of waste through the supply chain, and imagine, whenever you buy a t-shirt as a consumer, you also pay for all the t-shirts that did not get sold you also pay for all the t-shirts that got sold at a discounted price because somebody needs to pay. And in order for you to be able to afford that t-shirt that also pays for all the waste in the supply chain, the companies need to really push the prices of the materials that they use, of the labor, right? So if you internalize those costs and you figure out how to eliminate waste, that's what we do, then we end up saying we never do sales. We just have a policy of 0 sales because the product should not lose value. You shouldn't pay for all the stuff that doesn't get produced or that doesn't get to market. So I think there's an economic efficiency element to it. It's not just about saving the planet. It's also about being financially smart.
It is, but there's also an element of being responsible towards labor, because I think one thing that we have taken massive advantage of, I would say we've disgustingly taken advantage of, is the fact that wages can be squished to the bare minimum and sometimes completely eradicated, meaning there's someone who's making your clothing who is getting nothing for making it. And once we start realizing that that isn't okay, there will be a massive change. But I think it's tricky, and I agree with you that we need to be discussing it way more than we are.
Don't you think, though? I mean, right now, the way that I see it, you need to have small pioneers like us who prove the case, right?
Sure.
And then you need to have the bigger players who look at the case, and the minute that it for them becomes commercially viable,
yes,
they can do it, and that's when you see the massive change, right? So we each have our role and part to play. For me, I have 2 things that I really want for the world in general. That's a new internet based on blockchain, so that we take democracy back and our information back.
Yes.
That's kind of irrelevant to this conversation, but I think that's one of the...
It's not,
exactly. It's not, because
it has to
transparency.
do with... Yes, it has to do with transparency, and it also has to do with massive wealth of few at the expense of many.
Exactly. So what I really believe in, and I mean, everybody knows it's coming. Very soon you'll be scanning whatever, your food, your clothes, your house, and you'll know who made it, what the water usage was, the CO2, all of that will be in your data. And when you have that, you also know what you're paying for, which doesn't, all the waste you're paying for. And so I think, basically, I think the industry just needs to get ready, because when that happens, either you're going to be on the right or the wrong side of that. Don't you think so?
I agree completely, but I think also heads will roll. I mean, there are business models that are based solely on the fact that we need to sell more and more and more and more and more. And they're not selling it all. So it's going somewhere, as you said. It's either being burnt or destroyed or sold to third world countries, where we are then ruining their infrastructure because
we're dumping all the
stuff we don't want, and then introducing an idea that you can actually buy a t-shirt for much less than what it's worth, and then ruining what would be local handcraft or skills or trade, which is also something that you're focusing on in your business model, is to also empower local trade. It's extremely tricky, and for someone as bright and as aware of all these things, I have to ask, I'm going to be devil's advocate.
Go.
I have to ask, why did you want to start a fashion company?
That's a great question.
Out of all the things that you could be doing, I'm very glad that you're doing it, because I do think people need to see that there is another way to do what is being done. But why? With all of the complications that we're talking about, why fashion?
Well, it's a great question, because I do not come from the fashion industry, and I started a company before that works with menstruation. So it's a pretty radical shift, but the reason why is because it makes sense. It's a very pragmatic approach. I think for me, when I was standing in that prison and I started mapping the world, I was looking at what would be the best possible way that I could help empower these women by creating a market so they could be employed, giving them good designs and good materials. And so in order to do that, it's also, how do you create something that is attractive? Nobody wants to be part of a pity project, not even those women. Nobody wants to. And I don't believe that that's sustainable at all. So I think the ambition just became, fashion really inspires people. And I think what I like about it is that it's attractive. It makes you want to participate. Instead of pointing fingers at the industry, let's just prove what really fucking cool fashion can look like. Where you don't compromise, where you have the cool brand, you have quality clothes, you have beautiful photo shoots. You're part of the whole picture, but the industry is just also part of the solution. So I think that's why I was really inspired by taking an industry which is working so poorly right now, and which is so progressive in some of its values, but at the same time has been in very many ways very superficial. I think there's a big need, but I also think there's a big demand.
How much of branding your company has to do with communicating what it is you're doing, and how much has to do with selling products that are quote unquote fashionable? Because that's obviously something a lot of people here discuss. Oh, the consumer doesn't want it to be this and that and this and that and this and that. Obviously you're targeting a very specific consumer.
Not necessarily, actually.
Not necessarily.
We're getting surprised, yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Do share.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in our business model, it's designed in a way that the more we sell, the more women we can employ, right? So it's a difficult question. How do you weigh your brand proposition, right? But for us, it is, does this sell the sweater, basically? Because that's when it comes down to the more sweaters we sell, the more women we can employ. And then I think it really depends on which part of the brain you're talking to. I think traditionally there's been, like in the saving the world industry, even in like the organic food industry until today, you've been talking to the rational part of the brain. You're like, you should take shorter showers. Do you know how much, water usage gets into your jeans? Blah, 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 blah. And that's fine, because we're also rational beings in some part of it. But what motivates our purchasing decisions are not rational.
No.
And I mean, industries have known that forever. How did we end up drinking Coca-Cola? It's not because we're like, this is great for you.
Or voting for people that we vote for.
Right, it's
or
emotional.
Buying houses that
it's emotional, and
afford.
in general, like classic capitalism knows this. This is marketing 1.0.
Yes.
So I think a big part of the solution, in my opinion, is just using what the industry already knows, but talking about a brand positioning in a cool way that people can relate to.
Yes.
And of course, we also tell the story about the women who make your clothes and that it's sustainable and so on. It's part of the whole brand. But basically, we want the part of your brand is like, ooh, am I going to look good in that sweater? I want to wear that tomorrow.
Yes.
Was she wearing that? That's the part of the brain that we want to talk to, because that's where I see, we can actually, that's what fashion does, and that's where it's great as well. It's self-expression.
Absolutely, and fashion has so many wonderful ways of communicating these things. I do think that we are looking at two trajectories. One being the quick fix. What's nice? What do I want? I want it now. This is hot. It makes me look good. It makes me feel good. It's warm. Whatever. Those are the quick needs. But I think we're also looking at a slower, and I'm an optimist, so this is also something that I struggle with. But I think we're also looking at a longer trajectory, which is about what we internalize as being good for us on a more philosophical level.
Right.
And I think knowing, all right, I bought this, I needed something to wear because I was cold, and it gets very cold in Denmark, and I need a wool suit. Okay, I'm gonna buy a wool suit. If I buy wool suit number A, I will buy it. I don't know where it came from. I don't know who made it. It will solve my problem, but it won't necessarily give me a peace of mind.
Right.
If I buy wool product number 2 or B, then I know I'm employing these people. I am helping to create a new way of consuming and participating in a fashion industry.
Right.
Okay, it solves my problem, but it's also giving me a longer
You're part of the solution, basically.
enjoyment.
Yeah.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
I'm part of a solution on a global planet. But it is a mediation game, and I know that some of the big players here, and when I say big players, I'm talking about bigger companies, very big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. They're very much confused or debating how much of that needs to be their profile.
Right.
We also spoke about it before. If your business is built on the fact that you can get labor for cheap or for free, how do you all of a sudden stop doing that?
Yeah, well, I think you need to, that's why, for example, if you pay good wages to your workers, what we do, we invest in only the best materials, but then we also communicate how much that cost is. Then we also communicate to the consumer, so what do you pay for it? I think transparency is a big part of it.
Yes.
And maybe you'll lose some customers. Seriously, you might. And it's also, I think that, I mean, again, we're a small brand. We don't have to turn like a big machine around. That's a completely different ballgame. But I think what comes down to it still for me is how do you create attraction? I think all of it is really, I mean, we look alike. Like we want to be part of something that's cool. Yes. And we're changing what cool used to be to what cool will be. Yes. And I think when you walk into a bar, you see this beautiful man or woman, and you start flirting, and then all of a sudden you're getting some kind of rejection in a way. Then you want him even more, right? That's well, at least that's how most of us work. I tend to see sometimes, I think there's a flirt with our products as well. You need to make yourself attractive and hard to get and make it position your things, like what Tesla did. Start with the high-end model that aspires people.
Sure.
And I think that's, it's emotional. We're human beings. And I don't think it should be as complicated for big brands to talk about how much should we communicate. There's one agenda which goes into the sustainability report that talks about the SDGs and talks about CO2 footprint, and that's great.
It is.
But not for the consumers. We don't say ethical on our website anyway. If I were to, of course what we do is ethical,
yes.
But we don't communicate that because it's just not a very sexy word. We talk to the consumer about what we do. We employ women in prison. We use 100% natural materials.
Right.
We eliminate waste in our supply chain. Like, let's just make it tangible and not try to blur it with all these fussy words that I think, they're just connotated with a lot of different elements that might not be, good for the brand.
And might not, in the long run, be good for global inequality, which plays on the narrative that some people are better than others. And when you start talking about, oh, we're doing this for you, and it becomes a charity game, you're also you're taking away empowerment.
You're taking away desirability, you're taking away dignity. I think, so that's again, how do you make it aspirational, how do you make it desirable, how do you make it, if it's hard to get, people will line up.
Sure.
So I think that's at least what we're trying to do.
Right.
It's turn it around instead of apologizing. It's not cool fashion because we actually are very good for the universe and sustainable. It's like no, scratch
Focus
that.
on the product.
We're better than that. We actually do it the right way and we believe in it. And we only make these 100 sweaters in this color.
Right.
If you want one, you need to sign up before everybody else signs up, right?
The supreme model.
The supreme model, the VIP line.
Get in the line.
Make it attractive.
Get your tent.
Make it attractive, and then I think, honestly, it hasn't been that hard because people are ready.
Yes.
Fashion magazines are ready. Like people are ready to have deeper values in fashion, to talk about more than which color is your collection based on, or I think people are hungry actually.
I think you're
so
right.
there's it's not that hard. I don't feel like we're pushing anything here. I think there's a lot of traction and magnetism to rethinking things and also being honest. I think the humble approach and an honest approach to really, saying what you're trying to do and inviting people into the conversation.
It's a tricky balance though because you're humble but you're exclusive. So it's always that line. But I can't help but wonder, what is your business model? Are you looking at a circular economy? Is it growth based? Because we were talking about capitalism for good.
Right.
Obviously, you're in a business now, and you've got people to employ, and you probably want to employ more.
Right.
So you probably want more income. How are you integrating some of that into your business model? I think it's really fascinating for small brands, but also really fascinating for larger brands who are looking to make a huge leap into something more sustainable.
I think in general, going through the different points that I did before in the supply chain, I think that's fundamental. So because in general there is, an antithesis of making products. In general, we shouldn't be if we really want to be sustainable, right, we shouldn't make a new product.
Right.
Should we start there?
Which is why I asked you,
so
why are
you
in fashion? Yeah. Why are you essentially in retail where there's always going to be a backstop?
We're not in retail.
No. This is true.
That's very important.
But and also you have eliminated the concept of backstock by making it only.
We only we sell, we produce, and we produce what we sell, and then we design products that are made to last, right? So we don't do like a super, something that's going to last for 30 seconds and then it's over. Right. So I think we build on some of the fundamentals of Danish design, which is quality in the design process. We have very few products. We exchange the colors once in a while and mix it up. But I think looking at design for much more a longevity project like this chair. So something that you'll really appreciate. And then I think another element is putting value into it. I think the human factor shouldn't be underestimated. A grandmother told me once that when she was knitting a sweater for somebody, she always thought about that somebody. It took her a week to knit. And I think it's kind of the same with our products. And I think when you get a sweater with the name of the woman who made it inside of the prison in Cusco, it's much more difficult for you to just dispose of it somewhere. Like you get some kind of relationship and putting value back into what we have in the world, I think also has an element. And I think the final part of it is something we still need to work on, but it's natural materials. You could potentially dispose of it in the woods if you wanted to. I hope you don't want to do that. No. You could also re-knit it. Maybe someday we'll do an order where we take back the products and whatever you can exchange it for something else. I think the recycling part is super interesting as well. Or work with another partner who only has recycling clothes. I think there's also a limit to how much everybody should do. We should find like-minded partners and just create that patchwork. So I think by design, it's about creating something where each part of the process is something that you can be completely honest and actually proud of. But I do think that we would like to wear new clothes. And I think we should be proud of also liking fashion. There's too much in this conversation sometimes that's kind of demonizing fashion. And I think it's important to remember that shouldn't come with guilt. We just need to make sure for all the consumers and for the customers that when you walk down the center of Paris or Copenhagen, whatever, that you can just choose whatever you want and just know that the way that it's been produced and who made it are getting the proper treatment. So you don't have to worry about that. I think that's where we need to be.
Absolutely. On those very wise notes, Veronica, I want to thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you for a good conversation.
Very enlightening and yes, definitely. Let's get guilt-free fashion back on track so we can look good and feel good about it.
Isn't that what we all want?
That's what we all want. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.